Have you ever met a woman who seems to radiate confidence without even trying? It's not just about her looks, her outfit, or the way she moves. It's something deeper, something you can feel. The way she talks, the calm in her tone, the way she takes up space without apologizing for it. You might not even be able to put your finger on it, but there's this undeniable energy, a quiet strength that feels magnetic. That's what psychologists call authentic confidence, and it's one of the most powerful and misunderstood forces in female sexuality. The fascinating thing about confidence is that we often assume it's something you either have or you don't. But research in psychology tells a different story. Confidence, especially sexual confidence, isn't a trait you're simply born with. It's a learned behavior, one that's shaped by years of socialization, early experiences, and the messages we absorb about what it means to be a woman. And here's the kicker: most of those messages are not designed to make women feel powerful. They're designed to make women doubt themselves. Think back for a moment to how most girls are raised. Studies show that from a young age, boys are encouraged to explore, to take risks, get dirty, be loud, and chase curiosity. Girls, on the other hand, are often praised for being polite, neat, good. Those small differences in encouragement might seem innocent, but over time they shape self perception. By adolescence, many young women are already internalizing the idea that confidence must be earned, that they have to deserve to feel powerful. And this conditioning doesn't just affect how women see themselves socially, it also affects how they see themselves sexually. Research has shown that a woman's self esteem and sexual confidence are closely linked. When a woman feels in control of her body, when she believes she's allowed to experience pleasure and express desire, her overall confidence tends to rise. But if she's been taught to suppress, to please, or to feel shame around her body, that same power turns inward into self doubt. Let's talk about body image for a second, because it's impossible to separate it from confidence. Studies consistently show that women who have a positive body image report higher levels of sexual satisfaction and desire. But here's something surprising: it's not about having what society calls a perfect body. It's about how a woman feels about her body. In one study, women who focused on what their bodies could do rather than how they looked reported significantly more confidence in the bedroom. They thought of their bodies as expressive, capable, and alive, not objects to be judged. That shift in focus from appearance to function changes everything. And that brings us to one of the most powerful truths about confidence. It's not about external validation. It's not about being told you're beautiful or sexy. It's about internal permission. When a woman gives herself permission to take up space, to feel desire, to enjoy her own body without waiting for approval, that's when real sexual power emerges. Of course, getting there isn't easy. We live in a culture that constantly sends mixed signals to women. Be sexy, but not too sexy. Be confident, but not intimidating. Express yourself, but stay within the lines. These contradictions create what psychologists call a double bind. No matter what a woman does, she risks being criticized. That constant mental juggling act drains confidence. In my research, I've talked to countless women who say that confidence comes and goes, that it feels situational. They might feel powerful in their careers, but insecure in intimate settings. Why? Because sexual confidence is a different kind of confidence. It's not about competence or success. It's about vulnerability. It's about being seen, and still feeling safe. There's a fascinating study that looked into what predicts sexual satisfaction among women. The results were striking. It wasn't frequency of sex, attractiveness, or even physical skill that mattered most. It was self compassion. Women who were kind to themselves, who could silence that inner critic that says, I don't look good enough, reported higher satisfaction and confidence. Self compassion, it turns out, is one of the most erotic psychological tools we have. But let's be honest, self compassion is hard when we've been trained to compete, compare, and criticize. Social media amplifies this problem in ways previous generations never experienced. Every scroll reminds you of who's fitter, prettier, more adventurous, or seemingly more confident. It's easy to forget that what we're seeing is curated confidence, the highlight reel, not the full story. Real confidence isn't filtered, it's felt. Now, here's a fascinating biological layer to all this. When women experience confidence, especially sexual confidence, their body chemistry literally changes. Testosterone, often thought of as the male hormone, plays a key role in sexual desire for both sexes. Studies show that when women feel confident and desired, their testosterone levels rise, which in turn boosts arousal and assertiveness. Confidence and desire form a feedback loop. The more confident a woman feels, the more sexually alive she becomes. And the more sexually alive she feels, the more confident she becomes. But what if that loop has been broken for years? What if a woman has internalized shame or fear around her sexuality? Can it be rebuilt? The answer, backed by science, is yes. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself, allows us to reshape our patterns of thought and response. Through new experiences, mindfulness, and emotional exploration, women can literally reprogram how they relate to their own bodies and desires. One of the most effective ways to rebuild confidence, according to research, is through sexual mindfulness, the practice of being fully present during intimacy without judgment. When a woman focuses on the sensations, emotions, and connection rather than how she looks or whether she's performing well, her anxiety drops and her pleasure increases. Over time, that mindfulness strengthens her sense of sexual agency. She's no longer an observer of herself, she becomes an active participant in her own experience. Another fascinating aspect is how confidence is communicated. We often think of it as loud, assertive, or dominant, but female sexual power doesn't always look like that. Sometimes it's quiet, a look, a pause, a subtle shift in body language. Evolutionary psychologists suggest that this subtlety is part of what makes female confidence so alluring. It's complex, unpredictable, and deeply tied to emotional intelligence. There's also a social ripple effect to female confidence. Studies have found that when women express self-assuredness in their relationships, setting boundaries, voicing needs, initiating intimacy, not only do they feel more satisfied, but their partners report higher satisfaction too. Confidence, it seems, is contagious. It fosters emotional safety, trust, and deeper connection. But here's something that doesn't get talked about enough: the link between confidence and authenticity. When a woman feels she has to perform confidence, to fake it, to put on a persona, she may look powerful on the outside, but inside, she's still navigating fear. Authentic confidence, on the other hand, doesn't need to prove anything. It's rooted in self awareness. It says, I know who I am, I know what I want, and I don't need to shrink or exaggerate to fit anyone's expectations. This authenticity becomes especially powerful when we talk about sexual confidence. Because real sexual empowerment isn't about being constantly bold or adventurous, it's about being honest, about desire, boundaries, curiosity, and emotion. It's about recognizing that sexuality is not a performance for others, but an expression of the self. There's a moment I often see in therapy sessions or research interviews that captures this perfectly. When a woman says something like, I just realized I've never asked myself what I actually want. That realization is seismic. It shifts everything because for the first time, the lens turns inward. Instead of worrying about how she's being perceived, she's exploring what feels authentic to her. That's where confidence begins, in curiosity, not certainty. Let's explore one more fascinating layer: the link between confidence, fantasy, and imagination. Research from the Kinsey Institute shows that women who allow themselves to engage in sexual fantasies without guilt or fear of judgment report higher levels of satisfaction and confidence. Why? Because fantasy is a safe space for exploration. It's where the mind rehearses empowerment before the body acts on it. When women reclaim their erotic imagination, they reclaim ownership of their desires. And that ownership has ripple effects far beyond the bedroom. Studies show that women who feel sexually empowered tend to take more initiative in their personal and professional lives. They negotiate better, speak up more often, and express clearer boundaries. In other words, the same neural pathways that support confidence in sexual expression also strengthen confidence in social and emotional expression. The brain doesn't separate the two. Now, if we zoom out, this all ties back to the central truth we started with: confidence is learned. It's built through experience, moments of curiosity, failure, discovery, and courage. Every time a woman challenges an old belief about herself, every time she replaces shame with understanding, silence with voice, her confidence grows a little stronger. But here's where it gets even more interesting. When psychologists studied women who described themselves as sexually confident, they found a common thread: these women weren't necessarily fearless. They still had insecurities, but they didn't let those insecurities define them. They understood that confidence isn't the absence of doubt, it's the willingness to move forward with doubt, to embrace imperfection as part of the process. And maybe that's what makes confidence so compelling. It's real. It's not about perfection, it's about presence. The ability to say, this is me as I am right now, and mean it. So when we talk about female confidence and sexual power, we're not just talking about sexuality in the physical sense. We're talking about the psychological liberation that happens when women stop asking for permission to exist fully, when they stop apologizing for wanting more pleasure, more truth, more space. If you've ever wondered why confident women seem so magnetic, it's not magic, it's alignment. Their inner voice matches their outer expression. They've made peace with the parts of themselves they once tried to hide. That harmony creates a kind of psychological glow that others can sense instinctively. And maybe the most beautiful part of all this is that confidence isn't a destination, it's a practice. It grows every time a woman chooses honesty over approval, curiosity over fear, and compassion over criticism. Each choice rewires her sense of self just a little more. So If we return to the beginning, that woman who walks into a room and changes the energy without saying a word, what you're really sensing isn't arrogance or bravado. You're sensing freedom. The freedom of someone who knows her worth, who's done the inner work, who's no longer waiting for anyone else to hand her permission. And that is the real psychology of female confidence and sexual power. It's not something you wear or perform. It's something you become. Have you ever met someone who exudes a kind of quiet sexual power? Not the kind that screams for attention, but the kind that makes you curious, drawn in almost without realizing it. It's not about how they look or what they're wearing. It's about something deeper, something that feels like they're completely at ease in their own skin. That's the kind of sexual power that doesn't come from seduction alone. It comes from emotional intelligence, autonomy, and the rare freedom to define one's own desires without shame. When we think of sexual power, our minds often go straight to the physical, the allure, the charisma, the so called sex appeal. But the truth is, real sexual power starts in the mind. It's psychological. It's about how we understand ourselves, how we navigate emotion, and how we connect. It's about being able to say, this is who I am, this is what I want, and not flinching when the world looks back at you. You see, for centuries, society has told women that power and sexuality can't coexist. Be desirable, but not too desiring. Be wanted, but don't want too much. It's a paradox that has shaped generations, one that teaches women to perform sexuality, not to own it. That's why emotional intelligence becomes such a revolutionary force in female sexual power. Because emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize, understand, and manage one's emotions, breaks that script entirely. It replaces performance with awareness. It allows women to experience desire as something within, not something for someone else. Think about what happens in the body when someone feels emotionally connected and understood. The brain releases oxytocin, the so called bonding hormone, which amplifies trust and deepens pleasure. Studies show that women who feel emotionally attuned to their partners experience higher levels of sexual satisfaction and arousal. But here's where it gets interesting. This doesn't mean women need another person to activate that feeling. Emotional intelligence also means being able to generate emotional safety within yourself. When you feel grounded, self aware, and non judgmental, your nervous system relaxes, your body opens up. Desire flows more freely. That's why autonomy, the second pillar of real sexual power, is so essential. Autonomy isn't about being alone, it's about choice. It's the psychological freedom to say yes when you mean yes, no when you mean no, and to know the difference. It's understanding that your desires are valid, even if they don't fit the mold of what society says they should be. I often talk about something called sexual agency, the sense that you are the active author of your sexual life, not a passive character in someone else's story. Research consistently shows that women with higher sexual agency report greater satisfaction, more positive body image, and stronger emotional resilience. They're not necessarily having more sex, they're just having more authentic experiences. And that authenticity, that ability to choose what aligns with your truth, is where real power lies. Now, let's talk about shame because it's impossible to understand sexual power without addressing it. Shame is one of the most destructive emotions when it comes to sexuality. It's the internalized voice that says, you shouldn't feel that, or that's wrong, or good girls don't do that. And the cruel part is that shame often hides behind the mask of control. It makes people suppress their desires so they can appear normal while secretly disconnecting them from their own pleasure. Neurologically, shame triggers the same regions of the brain associated with physical pain. It's not just emotional, it's embodied. It creates tension, anxiety, and dissociation. But when women begin to challenge that shame, when they start exploring their desires with curiosity instead of guilt, something profound happens. They literally rewire their brains. The pathways once associated with fear and inhibition start linking with pleasure and acceptance instead. That's the power of neuroplasticity, the ability of our brains to change and adapt based on new experiences and beliefs. I once interviewed a woman in her 40s who told me she spent most of her life thinking she wasn't sexual. But as we talked, it became clear that she'd never actually given herself permission to explore what being sexual meant for her, without judgment, without comparison. She began by journaling her fantasies, not to act on them necessarily, but to understand them. Over time, she said something that stuck with me. I realized my fantasies weren't dirty, they were mine. That's autonomy. That's emotional intelligence in action. And here's what's fascinating: fantasy and imagination aren't just psychological games, they're deeply physiological. When we fantasize, our brain lights up many of the same regions involved in actual sexual activity. The difference is that in fantasy, the stakes are lower, the control higher, and the sense of safety more complete. That safety allows the brain to experience pleasure without resistance. And when we bring that same sense of safety into real life experiences through emotional awareness and autonomy, sexual fulfillment becomes not just possible, but natural. One of the biggest misconceptions about sexual power is that it's about control over others. But research shows that the most sexually confident individuals are those who seek mutual connection, not dominance. They derive pleasure not from manipulation, but from authenticity, the open, vulnerable exchange of emotion and desire. That kind of confidence doesn't diminish partners, it elevates them. So, why do we often confuse seduction with power? Because seduction is visible, it's performative, it gives us immediate feedback, the glance, the attraction, the chemistry. But seduction on its own is fleeting. True power lasts because it's grounded in self knowledge. It's not about who you can attract, it's about how deeply you can connect. To yourself first and then to others. There's a reason people find emotional depth so intoxicating. From an evolutionary perspective, humans are wired to seek partners who can read and respond to emotions.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence signals safety, empathy, and reliability, traits that foster both intimacy and survival. That's why someone who's calm, attuned, and expressive often feels more magnetic than someone who's simply attractive. The brain interprets emotional intelligence as trustworthy arousal. And yet, in modern culture, we've commodified sexuality to the point where power is often confused with performance. Filters, fantasy images, and the endless pressure to look the part have created a world where many people feel sexually exhausted, constantly comparing, constantly performing, rarely feeling fulfilled. But the truth is, power can't be photoshopped. It's energetic, it's emotional, it's the deep alignment between your inner experience and your outer expression. Let's take an example from psychology. When someone experiences cognitive dissonance, a mismatch between what they feel and what they show, their confidence drops. They might smile but feel insecure, or act bold but feel anxious inside. The same applies sexually. When a woman acts seductive to meet expectations but feels disconnected from her own desire, her brain reads that as inauthentic. It activates stress responses instead of pleasure circuits. Over time, that disconnect dulls both desire and confidence. But when she acts in alignment with her real feelings, when her desire, boundaries, and expression match, her body responds differently. Her parasympathetic nervous system activates, allowing her to relax into pleasure. Her arousal deepens, her orgasms become stronger, and her confidence expands. That's not just psychology, that's neuroscience. The body rewards authenticity with pleasure. Emotional intelligence plays a central role in this alignment. It allows women to identify what they truly want, communicate it clearly, and navigate vulnerability without shame. In relationships, emotionally intelligent partners create space for honesty. They can have uncomfortable conversations about boundaries, fantasies, fears without turning them into conflict. This emotional safety becomes the foundation for sexual safety. And from that safety grows power, not over someone else, but within oneself. Here's another surprising finding. Studies have shown that women who make decisions about their sexual experiences based on autonomous motivation, meaning they act out of personal desire, not external pressure, report significantly higher levels of satisfaction and self esteem. In contrast, those who engage in sex to please others, fit in, or avoid rejection often experience regret or emotional fatigue. The difference isn't in the act itself, it's in the motivation behind it. Autonomy gives desire meaning. It allows women to redefine what pleasure looks like for them, whether that means exploring new experiences or choosing not to engage at all. Power isn't always in saying, sometimes it's in having the strength to say no without guilt. And what about vulnerability? It's easy to think of it as the opposite of power, but in reality, vulnerability is what gives power its depth. To open yourself up emotionally and sexually, to be seen and accepted as you are. That's one of the most courageous acts there is. Psychologists like Brené Brown have shown that vulnerability and courage are inseparable. You can't have one without the other. Sexual power then isn't about invincibility. It's about authenticity, the courage to be seen even in your rawest moments. There's also a beautiful interplay between emotional intelligence and empathy. When a woman understands her own emotions deeply, she can tune into her partners with clarity. This mutual awareness creates resonance, a state where both partners' nervous systems synchronize. Their heart rates align, their breathing matches, and their brains release oxytocin in harmony. It's what scientists call interpersonal attunement, the biological dance of connection. That's the invisible thread of sexual power most people overlook. So, when we say true sexual power lies not in seduction, but in autonomy and emotional intelligence, what we're really saying is that it lies in connection, first with yourself, then with others. It's the ability to express your sexuality as an authentic extension of who you are, rather than a performance for validation. Over the years, I've seen how this transformation changes people. A woman who once felt anxious about intimacy begins to feel grounded and confident. Her relationships deepen, her pleasure grows, and her sense of self expands. Why? Because she's no longer chasing approval. She's living from her truth. And that truth, when embodied, is magnetic. It's not the kind of power that demands attention. It draws attention. It doesn't conquer, it invites. It doesn't manipulate, it connects. And that kind of power doesn't fade with age, beauty, or circumstance because it's built from the inside out. In the end, the most powerful sexual being is the one who knows that their worth isn't defined by others' reactions, but by their own self awareness and freedom. It's someone who can look at themselves, flaws and all, and still say, I am enough. I am whole. I am free. Because that's what true sexual power really is. Not seduction, not performance, but the beautiful alignment of body, mind, and desire. It's knowing yourself so deeply that pleasure becomes not a goal to reach, but a state of being to inhabit. And when you meet someone who radiates that, someone who isn't trying to impress, who simply exists in their truth, you feel it. It's not loud, but it's undeniable. That's not seduction. That's sovereignty. And that is the real psychology of female sexual power.